My personal story was that inequality in the household started to influence my attraction. I could not be attracted to not just my husband, but actually to men
Yeah.
because of how unequal I felt things were, because of how unfair I felt like it was. And so I absolutely think that like intimacy and fun and playfulness in a relationship, like you need that foundation of everyone getting their needs met first.
Welcome back to Private Parts Unknown, a podcast about love and sexuality around the world. I'm your host, Courtney Kocak, and I am so excited to introduce you to today's guest.
Hi, my name is Corinne Low. I'm an economist at Wharton, and I'm the author of the new book, Having It All: What Data Tells Us About Women's Lives and Getting the Most Out of Yours.
Okay, awesome. Let's start with like the big picture. What is the premise of Having It All and what inspired you to write it?
So, Having It All is a combination of research and personal stories about what the title says, why it's so difficult for working women to feel like they have it all or even are just in control of our lives right now. And it starts with my own personal story of feeling like I was getting impossibly squeezed from every angle and just kept working harder but wasn't really getting what I wanted. And I wanted to figure out what was going on in my life. And it was especially ironic because I was an economist who studied women's career family trade-offs, and then I found myself living in it. So the book is meant to empower women. It's written to women. Of course, there's a lot of big structural changes that we need, and the book acknowledges that. But the main focus is saying, all right, given that things might kind of suck right now, how are you going to feel like you're in the driver's seat and be able to get more of what you want, even if it's not at all the way society defines it?
Totally. Okay, so let's go back to 2017, I think it was. What were some of those like pressures you were feeling that made you feel the squeeze?
Yeah, so, I say I gave birth to my son and also a midlife crisis because I was commuting 2.5 hours from New York to my job in Philadelphia. I had this newborn, and then I was at the time married to a man and felt like, things weren't perfect, but they kind of worked. And like all of that stuff that kind of worked stopped working when you added a baby to the mix. And so I felt like I was falling behind at work. I was looking at my male colleagues and I was like, not only are they getting more done, but they just seem like relaxed and like happy. And meanwhile, like I am just like constantly like on the verge of tears. And I wasn't getting to be the type of mom that I wanted to be. So I tell the story in the book of, I'm commuting and, some days that went relatively smoothly, but then still it's like, 5 hours, like a total commuting
That's
time.
so much.
But then, like, then there's track work or there's a delay. And so, I, at some point, like, I'm trying to leave work at 4 so I can hopefully make it back by bedtime. And instead, there's track work. And I end up pumping in the Amtrak bathroom, crying because I'm going to miss bedtime. And I'm just like, what am I doing? This isn't adding up.
Yeah. So, yeah, how did you start to unpack that for yourself and like I want to get into the structural component of it too. Like, how did you realize like this is not just a me thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was like, I guess this is what life is like, and I feel like I'm failing in every dimension. And so I used my tools as an economist to kind of look at the data and try to understand it because it was a story I was hearing from, other female friends of mine. And the data showed me like this wasn't just us, it wasn't in our heads, that this was actually like a uniquely difficult period to try to have it all because high-powered careers were more demanding than ever, and so requiring workers to put in more hours. Men's roles at home hadn't changed. Men were doing the same amount of housework as they were in the 1970s. And then meanwhile, you add to that time with our kids had skyrocketed. So moms today spend twice as much time with our children as moms a generation ago. And that fact alone was so freeing for me because it's like, oh, it's not me thinking that this doesn't add up. It's actually harder today than it was, for our moms or for the women who came before us, who we feel like we're letting down because we're not able to somehow juggle those career and family responsibilities.
Totally. So, okay, so getting into a relationship, knowing all that now, like how you recommend like couples should treat partnership like a job offer. How how do they negotiate the minimum terms of this agreement before
Yes, I
they get
love
in too
that.
deep?
Yeah, like, my joke is that we interview for the wrong position. We interview for the position of boyfriend when what we need is like a co-CEO of the household, right?
Totally.
And I'm like, seeing the position I was in and my female friends were in at the time, I was like, if we had been thinking about what our lives were going to be like right now when we were dating, we just would have thought about this really differently, right? Because we ask questions like, what kind of movies do you like? And we don't ask, like, who does your laundry? What meals do you like to cook? And when was your last dentist appointment? Right? And so that was, maybe you don't feel comfortable yet asking, like, what kind of parent do you want to be on the first date? But you could be like, oh, I'm looking for a new dentist. Do you like yours? And you're going to find out that the last person who made him a dentist appointment was his mother. And he's waiting for you to be the next one to make him an appointment. So if you want a full-grown partner, adult, to share the load with you in the household, you've got to look for one when you're dating. And I think for so many women, we go into this magical thinking where we're like, oh yeah, he doesn't know how to take care of himself, but like he's going to step up and he's going to be a dad and a partner, or we just never even think about that future, right? We're just thinking about the now, and like that's so human. That's like in our biology to think about the now. But we've got to think about the fact that no one is cute when you are cleaning their toothpaste off of the bathroom sink.
Totally. Okay, so like for people who are already in it, they failed to do the interview. Now they're in the trenches. Like, how do they get out of this unequal distribution?
Yeah, so the book has a lot of different strategies, and I'm also hearing a lot of couples like reading it together, and I think that
Oh,
that's
that's a great
great,
idea.
like to
Yeah.
just and that's what I think you want to make it a shared project. Like you don't want to make it something where it's like, okay, I'm yelling at you or nagging at you, right? And I think that there's scope to do that because when I present my data to men, every man I've ever presented my data to tells me that he is the exception to this and that he is sure that he does half of the household work, right? But that tells me something hopeful, which is that he wants to do half, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
he wants to be an equal contributor. So I think that's where you start, is you say like, hey, I want to talk a little bit about this. What do you think are like division in the household is, or what do you think it should be? How should we be splitting this up, right? And they're all going to say, like, of course it should be fair. We should be pitching in equally. We should each be doing things according to our strengths, right? Then you say, okay, great. Well, let's take a look at what it is. Let's try tracking our time and seeing how it lines up with our shared values that we both just affirmed, right? And there's a tool on my website, CorinneLow.com, that lets you track your time with your partner, and it makes graphs because a lot of women are like, he won't listen to me, but he'll listen to the graphs. So you first align on by saying, yes, our shared values, our shared vision is we should be splitting equally. Then you track your time, you take a look at the graphs, and then you kind of figure out how to reallocate things.
I love that. Just the math of it. Look, just look. Okay, so a lot of people find that this kind of unequal labor shows up in sex. Like, how does it affect intimacy? And like, how can you fix that?
Yes, so much, right? And that, Courtney, if you know my story, I used to be married to a man and I'm married to a woman, right? And like, I have joked, like, that being a lesbian is an evidence-based decision. I'm not serious about it. I'm not telling, your listeners that everybody needs to divorce their husband and marry a wife, but I do think that you need somebody who does the laundry because the dirty laundry is deeply unsexy. The toothpaste
Yes.
on the bathroom sink is deeply unsexy, right? And so for me, my personal story was that inequality in the household started to influence my attraction. I could not be attracted to not just my husband, but actually to men
Yeah.
because of how unequal I felt things were, because of how unfair I felt like it was. And so I absolutely think that like intimacy and fun and playfulness in a relationship, like you need that foundation of everyone getting their needs met first, right? I tell this story in the book, and it's the story that makes everybody's jaws drop, that I talked to this one woman who said, Corinne, I haven't been for a run in 4 years since my son was born. Okay. And then I said, wait a minute, I just talked to your husband and he told me that he swims for an hour every day.
Oh my God.
And if you look at that, if you look at the way that his needs are getting met versus hers, how is she supposed to feel like having sex? Right? Like,
Totally.
she's not. And so, you have to be meeting each other's basic needs before you can, look at those other needs. And so that's a really quick checkup in a relationship is to say, how often do each of you get to do the whatever you want to do, right? How often do each of you get to go see your friends, go to the gym, just take care of yourself? Because also for a lot of women, we mistake our interests with keeping everybody else happy. We're like, oh, I get to do what I want to do. I bake cookies with my kids. It's like, no, that's parenting. You're like, oh, I volunteer. It's like, nope, that's volunteering, right? So, or you're like, oh, I do what I want to do. It's my career. And it's like, no, again, that's not actually your interests, right? And I know it's not because I ask people to do this exercise, which is I say, if money were no object, if you were independently wealthy,
I love this.
how would you spend your time? And when they do that, and they picture that, I'm like, all right, so you said you love your job. And yet in that picture, even if you love your job, you're not spending 60 or 70 hours a week at it. You're spending 10 hours a week at it, right? In that picture where you don't need the money. So what you are picturing, that is what you actually love, right? That's what you actually want to do. Now you got to do it. Now that's the challenge for you and your household. You have to figure out how to use the household's shared time and money budget to get you more of those things. And so this couple that I was talking about, I said, like, you need to hire somebody to do some of the stuff you're doing. And she's like, oh, I don't know. It feels like a lot of money. And I was like, but if you think about the fact that you as a household are investing an hour every day and your husband swims, he's a smart guy. He could use that to go do a consulting job and he could make you more money, right? So you are investing your budget in his well-being and you're not investing it in your well-being.
Yes, that's so good. I also, sex is a great carrot, right? Like, if we could have more sex, if things would be a little more equal around here.
I would want to, right? I think like that's the message is it's like to say like, look, for me to feel those other things like that. And that was, again, my personal story is like, I like completely lost touch with myself as like a physical being. And part of my post-divorce healing was like all of those things was getting back in touch with myself as just like a human being and living in my body. And so it's like, if I don't have the time in my life to go to yoga or to make myself a cup of coffee the way I like it and sit and drink it in the morning, how do I have space for pleasure?
Totally. Okay, let's talk about having kids. I'm 42 and I'm just now like, I think I'm gonna try this year. But yeah, you write that there's no single optimal time. I feel like I could not have done it before this moment. So, yeah, I would love to hear like what your thoughts are on that and like what does the data say about how women should approach this decision?
Yeah, and this is a place where, I feel like it is so unfair for us to let capitalism dictate like when we should have children that I just refuse to be another voice saying like, well, think about your career and timing it according to your career, because I really think that that's inhumane for me to say that one of the most basic things that makes us human, which is our desire to like have families. And again, nothing wrong with anybody if they don't want to do that. If that's not part of what you want, then that's fine, right? But if it is part of what you want, the idea that you should have to put that on hold for capitalism, for success, to lean in, right? I just think is really deeply outrageous. And I think it's like something that our ancestors would like laugh at because, when you're thinking about the environment in which our genes evolved, we were evolving in an environment for survival, literally life or death survival, right? And so now to say like, oh, but I haven't achieved this career milestone, so I couldn't have kids. It's like, that doesn't make any sense. People were having kids when, they weren't sure if there was going to be enough food to make it through the winter, right? So I just push back on that message and I say, look, it's about optimizing. It's saying when do you want to have kids and then optimizing around that. And absolutely, like, you can be informed by the data, and it's true that, like, there were times I've became a mother young and I just had a baby at 41, and I have a lot more resources now, right, to make that work. So even though I put myself back in what I call the squeeze by having a baby and a book baby at the same time,
Totally. I'm about to do the same thing.
I have the resources to kind of make that work for myself. I totally get that instinct that, like, it is true that money-wise, things tend to be easier later in life. But at the same time, your career is always going to be demanding. It's always going to be asking something of you. And it is always going to feel like an interruption and a reevaluation of priorities and a shifting and rebalancing when you have kids, because it's a massive change. And, like, wherever it is, wherever you choose to do that, you can do it. You can weather that storm and come out the other side with yourself intact. Or this new self, because really you become a new self. So, but the thing that I do say in terms of timing to women, because too many women that I know didn't, including myself, didn't really think about fertility until it was staring them in the face when they were in their late 30s or early 40s. What I do say is, if you get to age 34 and you are not in a relationship where you are going to start trying to have kids within the next year, freeze your eggs.
That's good.
Because this is when your eggs are going to be viable. This is when, maybe you could do just one cycle and get enough eggs to be able to have a child later. Even if you are able to have that first child, without any intervention, what if you want two, right? And then now you're going to be older when you start trying to use IVF. So it just is better to kind of bank that reproductive capital when you can. And it's going to free you up to not feel stressed, where then you're like, oh, I can't break up with him because then by the time I find somebody else, I'm going to be too old to have a baby, right? It gives you that cushion to say, like, I get to make these decisions based on what's right for me and not based on the ever increasing volume of the biological clock.
Totally. Do you, just on a personal note, do you find, like, can you tell the maturity? I know you're, like, new in with the new baby, but do you feel like it's like a kind of a new journey just in your maturity?
Well, having a baby at this age versus having a baby when I was young, it is different. Some of it is just because it's my second child. And so some of it is just like, it feels less existential. Like, I know that you're going to be okay, or I know that this phase is going to pass. But some of it is, I'm more settled in my life and in my community. I'm in a partnership where I'm supported. And yes, I do have resources. So some of the squeeze that, that I talk about, where the squeeze in the book, it's like both time and money, because we tend to have kids when we're still investing in our careers. And so, we don't have as many resources as we need to kind of free up our time. And so from that perspective, waiting to a point where I was more established in my career, right, that is helpful. So there's a lot of differences this time around. And it's hard. Having a baby is hard. This morning she decided to wake up at 6 a.m. and I was like, oh, so much for getting like a full night's sleep. And like, I guess we're up now, And some babies always wake up at 6 a.m., but she'd been like a pretty consistent, like, sleep till 8 kind of baby. I mean, she wakes up in the middle of the night to breastfeed, but then like she would sleep till 8. So this was like 6 a.m., bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and my wife and I started kind of like snapping at each other because we were trying to figure out how do we navigate this challenge, and she's got to go to work, but I know that I have a call at 9, and if I don't get any sleep now, whatever. So it's hard, and it's not going to ever feel like kind of a magical fairy tale, which is also part of the message of the book, which is just that, like, I talk about men being stuck in the 1970s, but I think in some ways women, in terms of our expectations for ourselves, are still stuck in the 1970s, because we still think that we should be able to do everything at home to this level, that it's going to be perfect and it's going to be, look like it does on Instagram. And that is a separate full-time job.
Totally.
We don't have time for. And even when we compare ourselves to our own mothers, it's like, And we might think like, oh, but she always made homemade Thanksgiving dinner, or she always had the house decorated, or she always like made us cookies or whatever. And it's like, yeah, because she wasn't reading the stories and doing homework with you and doing an hour-long bedtime routine. So the things that we do with our kids now that is making the time we spend with them double, we have to acknowledge that it's going to displace other things.
Totally. So speaking of Instagram, on Instagram, we see the girl boss, we see the trad wife archetypes, and you propose a third path. Please get us out of this mess.
Yes, because I do think we're in this cycle of like, backlash where it's like there was the lean in, the girl boss movement, which I think was very much driven by capitalism. It was not actually what's right for women or what they actually want. It was like, this would be great for your boss. You should just like tune all that out and work more hours and like forget the structural problems. And so the book, I feel like, is kind of an answer to that. But there's another answer to that that's happening online, which is kind of this backlash to it, which is saying like, that seemed really hard and those women seemed really unhappy. Wouldn't it be easier if I didn't have to do anything? And it's like, yeah, what you're glamorizing is being rich. You're not glamorizing like old gender roles. You're just glamorizing being rich. And yeah, it's true. That would be nice, right? Because like lower income families, no matter how traditional their gender roles are, actually rely on two incomes, okay? So yeah, and I just think it's very dangerous to have that be the answer, right? I have some critiques of that old model, but the answer to say women don't need careers, it's a very economically precarious position for women to be in. And that was the lesson that our, mothers and grandmothers learned because they found out like, oh, you could invest your whole life in the kids in the house and you could get divorced when you're 40 and need to start over at a minimum wage job. Or you could even become widowed, right? Or your husband could lose his job or become disabled. Like, you don't know what the future holds. And so there is nothing wrong with taking time outside the labor force to invest in your kids. I am never going to turn my nose up at that. But investing in your education, your career is like having a money machine in the back of your closet that you can turn on if you need it, right? And I think a lot of women these days are getting the wrong message. They're getting the message that they can achieve economic security through marriage. And marriage is always going to be insecure to some extent because as soon as you're relying on another person, there's no real security there. And let us not forget that the irony is that those women on Instagram, their career is telling these young women that they don't need a career. Like, if they were trad wives, they wouldn't be making content about it.
Totally. Okay, so God, I have a lot of questions for you. So we're gonna do this like a lightning round.
I love it.
Okay, so I want to talk about men. You say that men are the biggest lever at home. Like, what actually moves men's participation? Like, what gets them to actually? Is it policy, culture, their personal negotiation?
I think in individual marriages, right, it's the relationship and it's them wanting to show up for the relationship and for you because ideally you married somebody that you love and that loves you. And so you really conveying this is not working and this is the toll it's taking on me and setting those limits because often we don't, right? It's like even in my marriage, like everything that didn't work for me, I had said yes to, right? I had agreed to that 2.5 hour commute, etc. So I think that it has to come through the relationship, and then I hope longer term change is going to come through policy and culture.
What was like the biggest kind of lesson you learned from the book or you think exists in the book, like from a gendered economic history point of view?
So one thing that was really surprising to me was that the gender gap in cooking and cleaning is larger than the gender gap in childcare. And that to me is like a reason why I've got to call bullshit on people who think that it's like something innate or it's something that like men can't help or they're not good at, right? Because I understand that it's like if you're in a heterosexual relationship, you're like, I'm the one who has the boobs, I end up breastfeeding, I gave birth, I take maternity leave to recover, all of those things. But like, I don't sweep the floor with my uterus, so there's no reason that you can't be the one to pick up a broom. And by the way, when men get divorced, we see that their time cooking and cleaning goes up. So it's not that they just like don't mind if it's dirty or they don't care what they eat because they start caring when they don't have somebody else to do it for them. So I think that's a message that women should internalize, and if they need to, they should call bullshit in their own relationships.
Yes. Okay, I went to Helsinki for this podcast and we did a bunch of interviews over there and I was like, "Oh, this is like a feminist paradise." And then your data about Scandinavia is more complex than that. So what's
Yes.
what's going
Well,
on?
I think what's so interesting, and that's where like there's limits to policy, right? Is that you can be in places with much better policy environments. And then I do think women and moms are happier, they're better supported by the policy environment. But the piece that's about gender roles doesn't necessarily move with that. And so even in Scandinavia where you have these better policies, like you have a lot of like parental leave that women can take paid, but actually it's gender neutral. Either party can take it, and what we see is that women take it and men don't. The gender role doesn't move even though you're creating the policy support for it to move. So I think you have to be a little bit more proactive to actually move the gender roles, and that's what some countries are seeing, and they're creating policies that say, no, there's going to be parental leave that anybody can take, but then there's going to be designated paternity leave that's only for the man, and if he doesn't take it, then you don't get that leave. And that kind of gives the kick in the pants for men to actually take that leave, and then you see that that does impact gender roles, not just in the household, but actually for younger generations.
Okay, talk to us about having almost all on your own terms, I think is how you say it. Like, yeah.
Yeah, so what I call it is having it almost, and I say that I think we have to get comfortable with that if we want to reclaim our own happiness. Because if we try to put so many things in our time basket that don't fit, right, and then the basket ends up breaking and we end up like me crying in the Amtrak bathroom, that's not having it all. And so if we say that our goal is happiness, it's fulfillment, right, then we have to make choices about what fits in our time basket and what doesn't. And so that's going to mean saying no to some things, saying no to some things at work, saying no to some things at home. I call it throwing out your house plants because, you know, I think I would like to be the type of person who like has the beautiful herb garden on my windowsill, and like I'm not that person right now, okay? The plants are always dying and they make me feel guilty, and then it takes time and I have to like trim their leaves and water them and try to like buy fertilizer online. It is actually okay to opt out of some of these things. Some of these aesthetic markers of like domestic performance you might not have time for right now. It's also okay to outsource some things, and even if money is tight, because what I challenge people on is I say, look, everybody listening, do you take the car to a mechanic to get the oil changed? And everybody says yes. And it's like, well, that's outsourcing, but you just think it's a necessity because we assign value to male-coded tasks, and we don't assign the same value to female-coded tasks like organizing and meal planning. So it is okay to outsource and to, you know, therefore take something off your plate like that. And it's just okay for things to be messy and imperfect, and for you not to have everything at once, because your life is a book with many chapters. You're going to turn the page on this chapter that's hard, and there is going to be a chapter where you can be the world's best friend, the world's best daughter, the world's best volunteer, right? But there are going to be times where all of that doesn't fit, and I think once you see the time use data the way that I have, it like really gives you a wake-up call to say like, oh no, this doesn't add up, right? And our own well-being cannot be our last priority. It can't be that we make everything else add up and we leave ourselves at the margins. And so that's what I'm imploring everybody listening to do, is just like I said, what would your life look like if money were no object? Figure out how you're going to get more of those things, and understand that doing those things is productive. The same way going to work and making money so you can buy things you value is productive, doing things you value with your time is productive.
I needed to hear that, especially about the plants. Okay, I love how pragmatic you were about starting to date women. So since marrying a woman, was it easier to negotiate?
Yes. I mean, I think one of the things that I found so much easier is that like she has preferences over things at home, over the home domain. So she's like, oh, hey, I'm going to go like sweep up the backyard and shop for some patio furniture so that we can like use it while the weather's nice. Or she's like, hey, I, think that, my kid, like, I think he needs new soccer shoes. I'm going to order them online. Like, just that she has her own ownership over those things. And so it really feels like we can share the load. She wants things to be clean. She like doesn't like when things are dirty. She like does the laundry, right? And so then it doesn't feel like gendered when I'm the one who does more of the cooking or the meal planning, because there's something else that she's naturally going to do on her own. So I talk about weaponized indifference in relationships, where I feel like that thing from men of sometimes them being like, well, I don't care, whatever you want. But it ends up with like all the work on the woman's shoulders, right? So having someone who has like her own preferences about domestic tasks, that's a revelation. So there's a lot of stuff that I think it's true. It is easier. And then there's the stuff that it's like, oh no, this is just always going to be hard. Like I said, we were, snippy with each other this morning because the baby was awake and we're both sleep deprived and exhausted. And like, there's always going to be those things. You're always going to have to negotiate those household tasks. There's always going to be assumptions. And there's also always going to be invisible labor. And sometimes if you don't voice, like, hey, this is actually a lot of work for me to do this thing that helps keep our lives running smoothly, it's easy to take each other for granted. So I think you still absolutely need to communicate and have conversations.
Okay, final question. If you could redesign one economic policy to make having it all more possible for everyone, what would it be?
So if I had to pick one, the thing that's interesting is I would go with paid parental leave, but I emphasize, and I talk about this in the book, it's not going to close the gender wage gap because women are going to take it more. But I don't just care about gender inequality, I care about socioeconomic inequality. And one of the biggest inequalities in our society is that wealthier women tend to have access to either paid parental leave at their jobs or what is essentially paid parental leave within their relationships, because they're able to step back from the workforce and their husband's earning power is enough that that's economically possible for that family. Whereas poorer women don't have access to either of those. And the result is then you end up with intergenerational inequality, where those kids from lower socioeconomic status households aren't getting those investments of that parental time that we've seen has increased so much on average, but it's increased more for college-educated parents, for people higher in the socioeconomic spectrum. And so I think one of the biggest things, as you said, to help everyone have it all is everybody should get to spend time with their children and get to make those investments in their children. And if we want to do it with a childcare subsidy, for example, that's childcare subsidy should be caregiver neutral, meaning if a poor, lower income woman wants to stay home and claim that subsidy herself, she should be able to, because we see that wealthy women are able to do that. Wealthy women are choosing to do that. And so it's almost like those investments in children that when you're steeped in white Western feminism, you look at it as an imposition on you. Oh, I had to take this time off. It's a child penalty. It's actually a privilege. Spending time with our children is actually a luxury good, and not everybody has access to it. And so that's the thing I would democratize first before I even addressed some deeper sources of gender inequality.
Thank you so much for writing the book and being so generous with your time and insights in this conversation. Where can listeners find you online? CorinneLow.com, and on Instagram, Corinne Low PhD. There's lots of resources that I have. I have a newsletter called Feminomics on Substack, and the book is available. It's called Having It All in the US. It's called Feminomics in the UK and internationally, and it's available wherever you get your books. Definitely get your copy. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Private Parts Unknown. This is a video episode of the podcast. You can listen to it on the podcast feed. You can also watch it on the YouTube channel. Just search for Private Parts Unknown. You can help support the show and get a behind-the-scenes peek at onlyfans.com/CocoPeepShow. That is onlyfans.com/CocoPeepShow. Also, my debut memoir, Girl Gone Wild, is coming out April 1st. Please pre-order your copy. It really helps. Rate, review, like, comment, subscribe. Until next time, love you, privates.